Hello, I'm Shay Tompkins. I was placed in Blanket High School for my fall 2018 EDUC 3321 observations. Over the course of my 10 weeks at Blanket ISD, I was able to make some observations on the similarities and differences in the classroom and in the Your First Year book. I was able to see that some teachers do actually assume that students know what to do when they really don't. I was also able to see how a teacher explains their classroom rules, and I was able to see how a teacher builds relationships and manages a classroom. In Chapter 7 on page 50 of the Your First Year book, the authors state that many secondary teachers incorrectly assume that students know what to do. This, I learned, is true. One day, I arrived to Miss Heard's class earlier than usual. Her classroom serves as a study hall during this time. One of the students, an 8th grader named Jim, was very behind in his math class. According to him, the math teacher never explained to him what he was missing and doing wrong because he assumes that the student should be able to complete the assignments through his instruction time alone, and he doesn't go around to make sure that the students understand what he is teaching. So the student didn't realize how badly they were doing in that class. Even though this was not Miss Heard's content area, she understands that this happens and on with Jim during the pep rally to help him catch back up in math and to better understand the content that was difficult for him. The Your First Year book also makes it clear that it's important to state your classroom rules so that the students may know how to act and what is expected of them in their classroom. Pictured here is one of Miss Heard's rules, stating that when you are not at school, we do not just sit here doing nothing. It is your responsibility to make up your work in a timely manner. If you miss one day of class, you have one day to make up that work. If you miss 2 days of class, you have 2 days to make up that work. Miss Heard has her classroom rules up on the board, and she does a very good job of enforcing and making sure the students understand these rules as well. Pictured here are one of Miss Heard's classroom rules. When it became apparent that her students did not fully understand this rule, she took some time at the beginning of class to clarify to her students what this rule actually meant. Chapters 4 and 5 of the Your First Year book deal with classroom management and building relationships. It was my main takeaway from this that building strong relationships with your students will help you lead to a better classroom management system as you know how your students act and you're able to build more respect with them. Ms. Heard's senior English class was small, consisting of only 7 students. This allowed her an easier time to be able to build relationships with her students. That, combined with the small size of the class, the strong relationship she built with the students, and the maturity of her senior level students, Ms. Heard was able to have a relatively easy time managing her classroom. One of her classes I visited was on the completely other end of the spectrum. It was an 8th grade theater class. In this class, every seat was filled with a child who at times could be a bit rowdy, rambunctious, and talkative. Because the class was so large and young, they took a little more effort to manage and to learn how they act. But Miss Heard seemed to have no difficulties doing so. She also seemed to have a good relationship with these students, although, because there were so many of them, the relationships didn't seem like they were as strong as they were with her senior English class. My overall experience in Miss Heard's classroom consisted mostly of learning how Miss Heard managed her classroom and how she was able to build relationships with her students. Pictured here are one of Miss Heard's senior English students, Kate, as she studies for an assessment that she's about to take. Miss Heard was able to make strong and appropriate relationships with her students in her senior English class and had no problems at all with managing her classroom. This was largely in part due to the maturity and size of the classroom, as they were all seniors and there were only 7 of them. During my time spent in the extra classes at Blanket ISD, I was able to see that some of the similarities between these classes were that there was similar content delivery and that on Fridays they all took tests. On the extra days I attended class, I went to some of Miss Heard's other English classes. Because they were English classes, the content that was delivered was similar, although the stories that they read were different. Just like her senior English class, her other classes took assessments on Fridays as well. The only difference here was that the 8th grade theater class read poems that they had been working on for about a month instead of taking the written tests. Some of the differences between the normal and extra classes were the sizes, the relationships, and the management style Miss Heard had to use in her different classes. As I had said previously, some of the classes were as small as 7 students, while others had every desk full of students. These classes also had different age ranges, going from 8th grade to 12th grade. Because of this, the way Miss Heard was able to build relationships and the way to manage her students varied from class to class. To me, I felt that she had relationships with her smaller, older classes were stronger, but not necessarily more meaningful than those made with the younger, larger classes. It was also obvious that the older and smaller classes were much easier to manage than the younger and larger classes. This was largely due to the fact that those older, smaller classes were much more mature and easier to manage than the younger classes. When I first started my observations at Blanket ISD, I thought there was no way I would ever use any of the information I learned from my agriculture classes in these English classes that I was observing. However, I was able to use the knowledge that I've gained from my AGRI 2301 class to give some students some possible answers to a problem they were having and to help build a relationship with them as well. One day, before class had started, some of the boys were discussing a problem they were having with an engine. Because I'd been taking a small engines class, I've been learning about how engines run and some of the problems they have, and how one might be able to remedy said problems. So, after listening to the boys talk for a few minutes, I decided to chime in. We had a short discussion on engines, and I felt that I was able to build a sort of relationship with those students over the shared knowledge of the engines and the fact that I was able to give them a few extra pointers on how to fix their problem. During my observations at Blanket ISD, I was able to use the knowledge learned from EDUC 3321 about student-teacher relationships and classroom management to better analyze the way the teacher interacted with her class. While in EDUC 3321, Dr. Lumbreras helped me learn about the different types of student-teacher relationships and class management. While I was in Ms. Heard's class, I was able to observe and analyze her classroom management skills and was able to see if I'd want to take any of those skills into my own classroom one day, or if there were things that I thought could be improved upon or not. I was glad to be able to work at McAllister's Deli because I was able to use the customer service skills I gained from working there in order to build a relationship with the teacher. While working at McAllister's, I had the opportunity to talk to many different people from all sorts of different backgrounds and ages. Some were more chatty than others. Because of this, I was able to use the communication skills I obtained to talk with Miss Heard and to start to build a relationship with her. I was able to use my experience from training high school FFA teams to appropriately interact with the students in the classroom. I have trained the Brownwood High School FFA entomology team since the 2016 spring semester. It was over this time that I have learned how to properly act with students in an appropriate student-teacher way. I have used this experience to act appropriately with the students in Miss Heard's classes and to be able to build stronger relationships with those students. When I first began my observations at Blanket ISD, I thought that the relationships built between students and teachers would be the same in large schools as they are in small schools. I also thought that because Blanket was such a small town and that the school was so small and didn't have as much money as larger schools, that the level of education would be inferior when compared to larger schools. When I began to look at things from a social aspect, I began to believe that the relationships built between the teachers and the students have the potential to be much stronger in smaller schools than the relationships made in larger schools. I largely believe this is because there are less students and teachers in smaller schools than there are in larger schools. I feel that the teachers in smaller schools have the opportunity to build way stronger relationships with more of their students than teachers in bigger schools. This is because the teacher to student ratio is much smaller in the smaller schools, which gives teachers more time to build relationships with each of their students, and they are able to spend more one-on-one time with those students, also allowing those relationships to be stronger. Academically, I felt that the education received in the smaller schools has the ability to be just as good as the education that can be received in larger schools. At first, I thought that because larger schools have access to more money and more resources than smaller schools, that the education received at a smaller school would be way more inferior to the education received in larger schools. But over my time in Miss Heard's classroom and the time spent in Dr. Lumbreras' EDUC 3321, I was able to realize that the quality of education is much more dependent on the teachers themselves rather than the resources and money provided by the schools. I have thoroughly enjoyed my experience at Blanket ISD. I was able to get a real-world view on how classrooms are managed and how important student-teacher relationships are in the classroom. I am very appreciative of my time at Blanket High School. Not only did it help me better see how classrooms are managed, but it helped me clear up some of the worries and insecurities about teaching that I had at the beginning of my Blanket observations. I am glad I had this opportunity, and I look forward to the future experiences to come.